On today's episode, I'll be talking about the 2010 film The Social Network.
If you're looking for a man with no plans or programs, and he always leaves a chance to hold hands for romance. Are you looking for the Luke with an old man, a cold hands? It's a creature of the night who heads for his spotlight. I'm here to welcome you to Brandon at Random Reviews. No method when I choose. It's Brandon at Random Reviews. Yeah.
All right, everyone, welcome to Brandon at Random Reviews, covering one unsystematically chosen topic at a time. If you like listening to a guy recap and review movies in weekly episodes, then look no further. To keep up with the newest content, you can find Brandon at Random Reviews on most major video and audio platforms, as well as all popular social media sites. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe. Like I said, today's movie is The Social Network, based on the book The Accidental Billionaires by Ben Mesrick. Little disclaimer for this movie: despite this film being based on a true story, it is largely fictionalized. The major events of the film did happen, but the way the moments surrounding them took place and how people were portrayed is largely created from speculation and potentially beefed up for dramatic effect. This movie was released on October 1st, 2010, with a runtime of 120 minutes. This movie is rated PG-13 by the Motion Picture Association of America. Budget $40 million. Directed by David Fincher. David Fincher also, he's one of my favorite all-time directors. I love him. He also directed Fight Club, which is a movie that owns a very rare title and being described by many as being better than the book it was based on. Even the author, Chuck Palahniuk, of Fight Club, the book, said that he felt that they accomplished telling the story better than he did in the book with the movie. So that's pretty impressive. It's a great movie. Definitely, if you haven't seen it, I've already covered it on this podcast, but I would highly recommend checking it out. He also directed Zodiac, another one I've covered in my video form episodes, and honestly, I love Zodiac. It's probably one of my all-time favorites. I really love the true story of it all, how they kind of explore it, how they build tension so well. It's an amazing fucking movie. I really love it. And he also did Seven with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. That was kind of the movie that launched David Fincher into popularity and got him to start really making movies. I should say, I mean, he did Alien 3, but Alien 3 is regarded by many as to not be very good. I've never actually watched it because I've heard it was so bad, but I really should check it out just to see because I do love David Fincher. For the writer, we have Aaron Sorkin. He also was a writer on A Few Good Men, which is an amazing Rob Reiner movie. Rest in peace to Rob Reiner, of course. And honestly, that movie is so great. It doesn't seem like it should be as good as it is, but because it's Rob Reiner, it just beefs itself up so much. He also wrote Moneyball, the Brad Pitt movie, where he basically assembles a baseball team based on some less flashy characteristics of players. He gets a bunch of people that are not typical high dollar people to trade for or to sign. One of the things that this movie is kind of noted for is that, like, there were really good players on this team. Like, they bill this as like they put together a ragtag bunch and were able to have success as a team. But really, in real life, that team had a couple of really great players on it that basically kind of negates the excitement of the whole story. But I really like the movie anyway. And he was also, I believe, the creator and writer. I don't know all of what he did, but he was a major showrunner on The West Wing, as far as I know. Fucking great show, as far as I know. I've never actually watched it. I can't take that much politics in my TV watching. I just don't get into it like that. And I've not met many people that like swear by that show, but I'm sure there are legions of fans of it. For the composers, we have Trent Reznor, who is the frontman of Nine Inch Nails, and that kind of adds a unique touch to this film score. It's a very interesting score, but I will say it's pretty subtle. It's not like very pronounced in this movie. And Atticus Ross also is a co-composer on this, and he was the composer on the Book of Eli's score, which is a movie I really enjoy. I saw it in theaters. I thought it was really fucking good, and I thought it was really cool the way it looked and the story it told. It was very interesting. He also did the music for Gone Girl, which is another David Fincher movie with Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike. Really love that one. I've already covered that one. I think I did it in a tandem episode early on with Basic Instinct because it was kind of like a femme fatale type episode. And he also did the music on The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the US remake, which is yet another David Fincher movie. These two work together quite a bit. For the cast, we have Jesse Eisenberg, who plays Mark Zuckerberg, and he was also in Zombieland, which is a really fun comedy movie about a zombie apocalypse. And basically, it has not a uniquely comedic approach, but it's a very stylized comedic approach, and it's very cool and interesting, and I really find it enjoyable. He was also in Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, which I did an episode on as well, and that one is not... I don't know that I hate that movie as much as some people do. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I also think that Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor was one of the worst casting calls of all time. I've never liked his portrayal of that character in any capacity, but it is what it is. And he was also in a movie called Adventureland, and I think that has Kristen Stewart and Ryan Reynolds. It's been a while since I've seen that one, but it's more, despite having quite a star-studded cast, like there are a lot of familiar faces there, it was more like an indie type movie. It wasn't like heavily marketed or anything. Andrew Garfield plays Eduardo Saverin, and he was in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, the first and the second one. That was one of those ones where it was like they rebooted the Spider-Man franchise. As far as I know, that was because they had to make another Spider-Man movie in order to not lose the rights to the Spider-Man universe of characters. And those movies were okay. I really liked Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, but because they fleshed out the whole origin of the character again in that movie instead of just kind of picking up and maybe calling back to that or something. They just did a whole origin story that had already been done by Sam Raimi not very long before it. So it was not as interesting of a movie. And the second one really went off the rails with kind of how crazy the story was. And he was also in a movie called Hacksaw Ridge, which I believe was directed by Mel Gibson. And that's an interesting movie. It's basically about a guy who is, I don't remember what his religion is, but he's basically like a pacifist and he doesn't want to actually fight in war, but he wants to serve in the army. And so he basically is like helping people and stuff. And it's pretty interesting. It's a cool movie. Justin Timberlake plays Sean Parker, and Sean Parker is basically, I would say he's probably one of the more memorable characters in this movie. But anyway, Justin Timberlake was in Black Snake Moan, which is notoriously a movie that I watched because it had Christina Ricci in it, and she's a lifelong crush of mine, or at least a childhood crush of mine. And I mean, not to give everything away, but you do see some nudity from her in that movie, and it's totally worth watching. He was also in a movie called In Time with Amanda Seyfried, and it's an interesting premise for a movie. I don't know that it was executed amazingly well. I've seen people in internet comment sections kind of say that it looked like it needed to be a TV series. Like that was a better premise for a TV series than a movie. And I kind of agree. I usually wouldn't, but I think that it would have worked more in a serialized, continuous episodes kind of thing. Oh, and also Justin Timberlake was in the boy band NSYNC, and he's of course also had tremendous success as a solo artist. So he is a musician, vocalist type as well. And that was kind of where he got his fame initially, and then he became an actor. Rooney Mara plays Erica Albright, and she was in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. That's that US remake by David Fincher that I already talked about a little bit. She was in the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix. I covered that, I think, in my video episodes, and I really like Her. It was a movie that came out before all of this AI stuff had really gotten huge, and it's astounding how on point it is and what a great commentary it is. A lot of people kind of complain because it's not like a traditional storytelling type movie, so it's a little different, but I found it really interesting and I thought it was a cool movie. She was also in the movie Side Effects, and I haven't seen that movie since it came out in theaters. Like, I saw it in theater. I just kind of rolled the dice and took a shot on it, and I really loved it. I thought it was a really great movie. It's about basically, I want to say it's mental health stuff and like mental health medications and stuff like that. And it's a thriller, but it's very interesting. I thought it was a really good movie. Army Hammer plays both Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss, excuse me. He was in The Lone Ranger, which, by the way, he has the most ridiculous name I think ever, other than maybe Rip Torn. Army Hammer, are you out of your fucking mind? Anyway, he was in The Lone Ranger. He was the titular character in that movie. That was a movie that flopped, and it came out on the heels of Johnny Depp's burst in popularity after some of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies had kind of come out, and they wanted to capitalize on how popular he was. And I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't popular before then, but that really gave him more mainstream popularity at that time. He was in a movie called Call Me By Your Name that I still have yet to watch. It's got, I think, Timothy Chalamet in it, and I want to say it might be a foreign language movie, so that might be why I haven't actually watched it all the way through yet, because it's not that I won't watch those movies, it's just I have to have more patience and I have to kind of brace myself to actually watch them. And he was also in a movie called J. Edgar with Leonardo DiCaprio. I haven't watched that one, heard really mixed things about it. It's about J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI years and years ago, like when it started. And then we have Brenda Song, who plays Christy Lee, and she was in The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody with Dylan and Cole Sprouse. I was never into these shows because they kind of got popular and had a target demographic that I had already aged past by the time they came out. So that's kind of why I don't care about them. I was never young enough to enjoy like Drake and Josh or any of those kinds of shows, but a lot of those shows were really popular with people that were like maybe 10 years younger than me. And she was also in the movie Like Mike, which has Lil Bow Wow. I believe it's before he dropped the Lil, but he's a rapper, and I don't even know what that movie is. I want to say maybe Jonathan Lipnicki is in it too. Not really sure. For casting notes, Jonah Hill was reportedly in the running for the role of Sean Parker at one point. After casting, David Fincher forbade principal actors from meeting their real-life counterparts until filming was completed. Andrew Garfield was originally asked to audition for the Mark Zuckerberg role, but David Fincher decided he was too good at wearing his heart on his sleeve to play such an emotionally guarded character. Garfield found it helpful to go from reading for Mark to reading for Eduardo because he felt that Eduardo tried to understand Mark through Mark's point of view. For the plot synopsis, as Harvard student Mark Zuckerberg creates a social networking site that would become known as Facebook, he is sued by the twins who claim he stole their idea, and he is also sued by the co-founder who was later squeezed out of the business. For the tagline, you don't get to 500 million followers, or 500 million friends without making a few enemies. Sorry, I botched that a little bit, but anyway, that one is very prominently displayed on some of the posters, like huge letters, so it's not like a subtle little tagline. It's a pretty solid tagline, honestly. It fits the movie really well. Alright guys, let's just dive right into the plot of this motherfucking movie. So this one starts off with the song Ball and a Biscuit by the White Stripes, and we're basically just at this busiest bar or restaurant, and I really love this song, by the way. Mark Zuckerberg, as played by Jesse Eisenberg, is having a conversation with Erica Albright, who is played by Rooney Mara, over drinks. FYI, this is supposed to be taking place in about 2003 sometime. He's talking to her about how there are more people with genius level IQs living in China than there are people of any kind living in the United States, and she doesn't really seem to believe him, but he explains to her that it's because their population is so massive that makes sense, and it makes sense to me. I don't think it's that confusing. But he kind of tries to steer the conversation in the direction of basically bragging about his own intelligence, which is always great. They start talking about something called a final club that Mark wants to get into, and I guess it's basically just like this exclusive organization for elites, I think mostly at a college level, and they're just people that want to stand out as being better than everyone else. They also talk a little bit about how Erica likes the idea of guys that are on row crews because basically, I guess, the thought of what it would likely mean about their physique and other attributes to be participating in rowing, like you have to be in really good shape. Mark takes her mention of this as being bored with the conversation about IQs and other things like that, which he is correct about because she basically tells him that she's bored by it because he has been talking about it for a very long time. But she humors him by asking him which of these final clubs are the easiest to get into, and Mark explains that none of them are actually easy to get into, and he also explains that they are not influenced enough by simply being able to make a lot of money or by someone being incredibly wealthy as a candidate, and that it seemingly takes more than that to stand out for them. But Mark wrongly assumes that Erica's question about which one was the easiest to get into means that she is suggesting that he won't be able to get into one or that he wouldn't stand out enough and he might need to approach the one with the lowest barriers to entry because he might have trouble getting in or something. But she clarifies that she was simply asking the question out of curiosity and that she didn't mean anything else by it. So she just gets super annoyed with him because sometimes people really are just saying what they mean, even if your own insecurities don't really want you to believe that. Like Mark is basically suggesting that she's being cryptic or speaking in code, when in reality, she's just trying to had this conversation with him, and it's not really layered in subliminal criticisms of him specifically. But he does make it very clear that the final clubs are an important thing because they can lead to a better life. And he even suggests that Teddy Roosevelt was part of one, and that was a major part of him getting elected president. And to be clear, Mark is a total prick. So as Erica makes snide and annoyed comments to him, he is pompous enough to tell her that she should be a little more supportive of this desire to get into a final club, because he says that with the two of them dating, that he would be able to bring her to a lot of these events if he got into a club, and that she might be able to meet a lot of important people that she might not otherwise encounter in her regular life. She facetiously asks him if he would really do that for her, but she's really just annoyed that he thinks that she really wants that kind of life, or that she doesn't feel like the people she could meet would be good enough. Then she stops him and says that she wants to be as straightforward with him as possible, and she breaks up with him on the spot. But he doesn't believe she's actually being serious initially, and she goes on to explain to him that she's annoyed by his assumption that she's interested in what he's even talking about. She tells him that she finds it insulting that Mark is insinuating that he doesn't think she would ever have the chance to meet important people, and he says that the only reason the two of them were able to get into the bar was because she slept with the guy at the door, and this only pisses her off more because she clarifies that she's just friends with the door guy and that she has never actually slept with him and that he's just a good guy. But as Mark realizes that she's actually ending their relationship in this moment, he tries to backpedal and apologize, but it's pretty clear this was the killing stroke for Erica and an apology really isn't going to fix anything. She tells him that she has to go study, and then he tries to tell her that they should just stay and keep talking like this and that she doesn't really need to study repeatedly. She asks him why he doesn't think she needs to study, and he immediately fires back with, because you go to BYU, or to BU, which is obviously very condescending and douchey sounding, implying that BU is not a real school or is not as good as Harvard. Just out of kindness, she says that she thinks that the two of them should just be friends, and he says he doesn't want friends, and she says that she wasn't being serious and she has no intention of actually being friends with him. Then she really drives her point home by saying that she's sure he'll probably eventually become a very successful computer person of some sort, but she explains to him that she wants him to know that someday he's going to look back and think that people didn't like him because he's a nerd, but she says that in reality the problem is that he's an asshole, and that's why people don't like him. So obviously this whole intro scene is meant to establish what an unlikable piece of shit Mark Zuckerberg supposedly is, and it really does a pretty good job of delivering on that. Mark runs back to his dorm room at Harvard, and he's obviously very distraught about breaking up with Erica, and I want to point out that Rooney Mara was pretty high up on this cast list on IMDb for this movie, but she's not actually in this movie very much at all, so don't be thrown off by that. I do love the score of this movie. It's very dark and serious sounding, but it's quite a little break for opening credits as Mark runs back to his dorm. Like, we get all of these credits and everything, and it's basically like a very drawn out thing, and I don't remember it being like that. But he finally gets to his building and climbs up the stairs, and honestly, I'm not sure if this is still considered a dorm or if it's really just some kind of apartment complex on campus. It's obviously larger than dorms that I've seen, but maybe it's a Harvard thing, I don't really know. Mark sits down at his laptop and begins blogging, specifically calling Erica a bitch and suggesting that all BU girls might be bitches. Then he makes a bunch of comments about her misleading bust size, suggesting that it's the result of help from a push-up bra or something. He tries to come up with an idea for something to take his mind off of her, and he admits that he's a little drunk, even though it's only Tuesday night, and he browses over to a website that is for the Kirkland House Facebook, and that's Facebook with a space in between its two words. And he sees a bunch of pictures of the different people in the house, and his friend Billy Olson suggests that Mark should post those pictures next to farm animals and have people vote on who is the hotter of the two. Mark doesn't actually proceed with this exactly, but he does decide he wants to do something where he puts two people side by side to have others vote on who is better looking. And then he realizes he'll have to go and find a ton of pictures from each house site by hacking into each of their sites, and even explains that some are easier than others to retrieve pictures of, and he uses a lot of computer mumbo jumbo, and this is interspersed with one of the clubs having a party and boasting about how exclusive they are on a worldwide level and not just at Harvard. We hear Mark's voiceover really hammering home all of the technical jargon and how he's handling each house's unique setup on their site with their different Facebooks, and he just wants to show how much he knows about the stuff as he's hacking into them. We see his friend Eduardo show up after 2 a.m., and Eduardo is played by Andrew Garfield, and he's just in time for Mark to finish his little picture comparing website and make it go live. Eduardo was aware Mark was working on this because Mark has literally been blogging about everything all night. Eduardo wants to know if Mark is doing okay because he obviously knows that Mark broke up with Erica, and Mark just really deflects his concerns by talking about the website more, because Mark really only wants some kind of algorithm that Eduardo used to rank chess players at some point. Mark then explains to Eduardo what the website is all about, and Eduardo is writing the algorithm out for him on this board. I don't know if it's supposed to be just a regular dry erase board and they make it look clear for the movie or what. It keeps cutting back to scenes from the party that looks as raunchy and substance-filled as most college parties do in movies. But I do want to mention that most David Fincher movies are shot to look very dark, and this one is no exception. And honestly, that's the only criticism I have of him is everything he does is so absurdly dark. And it's not just real life dark. It's every room that you walk into is the darkest room that is supposedly lit that you've ever been into. There are now 4 people gathered around Mark's computer, including Eduardo and him, and they begin ranking the girls on their live website, and before long, many other students across the campus are shown logging onto the site and also ranking the girls. But because it's all guys glued to their computer screens, the girls at the parties start to notice that what they're looking at, and they're obviously pretty upset by what they're seeing on the screens. And it also doesn't help that they personally know some of the girls that are being shown on the website. Some girls are just looking on their own and remarking about how pathetic it all is. But it cuts to Erica with her roommate, who points out to her what's happening and the things that Mark said about her on his blog. Almost immediately, a couple of guys break into Erica's room with a small bra and ask her if it's hers, and they say they got it off a tranny, and of course, her and her friends tell them to fuck off. Eduardo points out to Mark that there is an awful lot of web traffic going to the site, and he tells Mark he thinks it might be a good idea to shut it down before it gets noticed by someone important and they get in trouble. It cuts to a Harvard official waking up to a phone call from someone working night shift at IT on campus, and the official asks the IT guy if it's just an unusual amount of traffic for 4 o'clock in the morning or what, and it basically the IT guy says that it'd be an unusual amount of traffic for halftime at the Super Bowl. So the official tells his wife he has to go in because Harvard's network is about to crash. Then it cuts to Mark and Eduardo seeing evidence of the network crashing on Mark's computer as they can't load anything. Eduardo gets really distraught about it because he knows that it might mean that they're getting in trouble with the school. Naturally, Mark thinks that it's something to be proud of as the other guys check and realize that they definitely cannot connect to the internet anymore. It cuts to a boardroom where Mark is being questioned about what happened that night. And I'm just going to kind of explain how this story is told in this movie. It's staged as a series of events that are interspersed with depositions between lawyers, defendants, and plaintiffs. Obviously, Mark is the defendant in these cases. In the boardroom, Mark is sitting on one side of the table with his lawyer, Cy, played by John Getz, and Cy's junior lawyer, Marilyn Delpy, played by Rashida Jones, who I have noted here is hot. Across the table from them is Eduardo and Mrs. Cox, who is played by Mary Beth Massett. Just to be clear, this deposition is set closer to the present before 2010, where Eduardo has accused Mark of basically screwing him out of his ownership of Facebook. After they call some sort of recess in this deposition, Marilyn turns to Mark and remarks about how crazy it is that the site got so many hits over the span of 2 hours. It cuts to Harvard rowing teams practicing on a river, and two arrogant twins named Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss who are played by Armie Hammer, are remarking about how much better they're doing than everyone else at this rowing thing. And to be fair, they are really far ahead of everybody else, but it's established pretty quickly that these guys are giant douchebags too. Also, I do want to point out that I will never clarify which twin is which in this movie because it's frequently impossible to tell who is supposed to be who, and it doesn't really matter at all because they don't do anything unique. It could really just be one person condensed. It wouldn't matter. They go back to some sort of dining hall, and one of their friends is talking about what happened on the website in the early hours of the previous morning, or that same morning, I should say, the previous night. The twins are very stunned by the amount of numbers put up by the website, especially considering that Mark set up the website in one night and he did it while he was drunk. It briefly cuts to the twins in a room, sitting in a similar boardroom table, and they're stating their name for the record in their suit against Mark Zuckerberg. But this is really just meant to establish their names for the audience and that they're also taking legal action against Zuckerberg in a separate deposition. In a flashback to some sort of hearing on campus, and I'm sorry if I'm not using the right nomenclatures for all of these different legal meetings, but they had this hearing where they're essentially explaining what Mark is being charged with, not legally, but by their academic institution. They let him have this opening statement, and Mark basically just dismissively says that he already apologized to a bunch of people, and he really thinks he deserves some recognition for pointing out the security flaws in Harvard's system, but they ultimately give him 6 months of academic probation, and it's clear both during and afterwards that Mark is not at all remorseful about what he did, but rather he regrets more of the decisions he made that ended up incriminating him so easily, like posting on his blog about what he was doing. Eduardo explains to him that he tried to stop him, and Mark acknowledges this, but he doesn't really seem to care. Then it cuts to Mark in class, and some random girl passes him a note calling him a dick, so he gets up and walks out. And the professor wrongly assumes that Mark just couldn't handle the complexity of the subject matter in class, but Mark makes a comment on the way out sharing the solution to a question the professor posed to the class. And I'll be honest with you, I can't speak for every college or university, obviously, but generally, if people leave in the middle of a college class, the professor probably would not call them out like this in front of everybody because no one in college really cares that much. And I'd be surprised if the professor actually would have known Mark by name in this moment if it was this early on in his class that somebody would have been leaving. As Mark is walking away from class, he's going through a hallway in one of the buildings, and the Winklevoss twins stop him. They explain to him that they have an idea that they want to meet with him over, and they take him to one of the clubs that he is so desperate to get into, but they explain to him that they can only take him so far in because he's not actually a member, and they mention the success of his site, and they ask him about some project they heard about that he did in high school. And he explains that it was an app for an MP3 player that would recognize your taste in music. And he explains that Microsoft wanted to buy it from him, but he wouldn't sell it to them. And he just uploaded it to the web for free, which perplexes them. And it also perplexes me. Like, it was for an MP3 player. Like, MP3 players didn't have apps. You could consume different kinds of media on them, and that was it. There was no app, other than an iPod Touch, but that hadn't come out by this point. But they sit him down and explain to him that they have this idea called the Harvard Connection, where people who join would have individual profile pages with their pictures and info. Mark asks them how it's different from sites like MySpace, and they explain that it would require a harvard.edu email address because it would be more exclusive and prestigious that way. And also, chicks that they just can't resist a guy who goes to Harvard. I guess this is the assertion, and I'm sure that is appealing to a lot of women. So basically, they're saying that the exclusivity of the site would set it apart from other social networking sites that already existed and were popular during this time. They explained to Mark that their programmer friends have either graduated or gotten too busy to help them, and they would love to have Mark build the site for them because they also like that he is a creative guy. And they mentioned that they know Mark has been taking a lot of crap from a lot of different people lately, and they think that it could rehabilitate his image to do this. And even though Mark knows that they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart, he still agrees to their proposal with almost no resistance. It cuts back to the boardroom where Mark and his lawyers are meeting with the Winklevoss twins, and their lawyers and his agree. I'm sorry, I worded this goofy, and their lawyers think that the agreement that Mark made to work with them seems pretty damning to his defense. And I don't want to assume too much from anyone listening, but this is the commonly known fact is that the Winklevoss twins are very popularly known as guys who accused Mark Zuckerberg of stealing their idea to make Facebook very early on. And it basically keeps rapidly cutting back and forth between lawyers on the teams opposing Mark and close to the present 2010 and the twins' case and in Eduardo's case, who are getting annoyed with Mark's unwillingness to give straight answers to questions. For instance, Mark reluctantly concedes that he agreed to help the twins in this moment. Then he's asked to tell the story of when he talked to Eduardo about making the Facebook at a Jewish fraternity's Caribbean night, because at that time it was called the Facebook. It flashes back to the night at the fraternity, and when Mark shows up, Eduardo comes over to him and tells him that he got punched by the Phoenix. And no, that's not some nerdy X-Men reference. It's one of those clubs that Mark wants to join, but Eduardo modestly suggests that they're probably only interested in him for improving their diversity because he's Jewish. What he means by saying he got punched by them is not that he is necessarily in the club, but that he qualified to go through initiation to become a part of the club. But Mark tells him that he has an idea that he wants to share with Eduardo outside, kind of not really acknowledging as much as he should or like congratulating Eduardo about getting punched. They go out through a back door, and Mark begins explaining a revelation that he had regarding the success of the site that night that crashed the Harvard servers. He explains that the appeal of the site was more than just being able to look at hot girls, because obviously you can find hot girls everywhere on the internet, but he explains that the real appeal was in the fact that they were people that the site visitors actually knew, were friends with, or at the very least, they knew were girls who also attended their school and could possibly have a chance encounter with. And Mark explains that it would be essentially recreating the college social experience, but there would also be the exclusivity of having to know the people on the site. It cuts back to Eduardo remembering that it was a really great idea in the boardroom, explaining that it wouldn't require hacking and that people would be providing their own pictures and information, and that people would choose who they invited or did not invite to see them or, whatever. Eduardo goes on to explain in the boardroom that at the time he initially couldn't understand why Mark was coming to him because it seemed like he needed more help coding the website from his programmer friends than anything. But at that frat party, Mark reveals that he needs some startup cash to get the website rolling, and Mark even offered terms at this time that Mark would have 70% ownership and Eduardo would have 30% ownership. Mark would handle the designing and writing of the code, and Eduardo would handle the business end and be their CFO. But as a little last-minute crotch punch, as Eduardo was walking back into the party after the discussion, Mark mentions that Eduardo getting into the club probably was a diversity thing, but Mark also just says, so what? Because effectively, Eduardo's assertion is that he believes Mark harbored a lot of jealousy toward him for having gotten into the club, and this was at best a backhanded thing for Mark to say to him. And that ultimately was the reason why Mark eventually squeezed Eduardo out of his share of Facebook, at least in Eduardo's opinion. Mark makes a comment in front of the lawyers that although he didn't have money at the time, ultimately he ended up having enough money after the success of Facebook happened to buy the Phoenix Club if he wanted to, which is kind of humorous because that doesn't really prove that he wasn't jealous at the time at all, and he couldn't have been sure on any level of what future success there might be for Facebook at the moment. When it cuts back to the deposition with the twins, Eduardo is actually being called as a witness and explaining what he knew about the Winklevoss twins based on his interactions with Mark. Eduardo explains that Mark told him that he didn't think the twins had anything good enough as far as ideas to really create an actual successful site, at least not on the level that Mark was envisioning. And he also seemingly resented them for their perception that Mark resented them for their perception that Mark needed to rehabilitate his image after the incident with the girl rating website. Mark didn't look at this as like being a bad thing. The twins' lawyer asks Eduardo if he knew that Mark was still talking with them when he was making the Facebook, but Eduardo didn't know that at the time. He also asks Eduardo if he realized at the time that Mark was leading the twins to believe that he was still building the Harvard Connection website for them while he was really working on the Facebook. Then it flashes back as the lawyer begins reading correspondence from his pile of evidence at the time where Mark was leading on the twins to make them believe he was working on their site, but really he was just putting off meeting with them again while he was working on the Facebook. During this time, Eduardo finds out that he made the second cut of initiation for potentially becoming a member of the Phoenix Club, and he's very excited, but when he goes to tell Mark about the good news, Mark interrupts him before he can share any of it to tell him that he needs more money. Then when Eduardo actually gets to tell him that he made the second cut, Mark gives him such an inexplicably douchey and more backhanded praise by saying that he should really be proud of that, even if he doesn't make it any farther, because obviously phrasing it like that makes it seem as though Mark doesn't think that Eduardo is going to make it any farther in the initiation process. And of course, Mark just doesn't really give Eduardo the time of day after making the comment, and Eduardo picks up on the distance between the two of them. During this time, Mark is continuing to blow off the Winklevoss twins, and they are shown reacting with greater frustration each time he makes an excuse as to why he can't meet with them. The lawyer establishes during the deposition that Mark purchased the domain for the Facebook and also finally sent a critical text to the twins. In it, he explained to them that he didn't think the website idea had enough functionality to draw in a user base big enough to allow it to run and become successful. And this was the first substantial thing that he had actually said to them at all, and it was more notable in that it was critical of their ideas, and it was also over a month after their first meeting. Eventually, Mark gets so frustrated during the meeting with the lawyers that he criticizes the twins' argument by stating that he didn't use any of their code, and when one of the friends of the twins points out that Mark essentially just stole their whole idea, he didn't have to steal any of their code because they had the big idea and he took it, is what they're saying. Mark says that their idea was to have a Match.com type of site geared toward Harvard students. And Mark explains that if they were actually inventors of Facebook, they would have actually invented Facebook. And it cuts to February 2004 when one of Mark's friends asks him about a girl Mark knows and wants to know what her relationship status is. And midway through trying to answer the guy's question, Mark has a revelation that might actually be a good feature for the Facebook. So Mark takes the idea and runs with it, and as he's adding the feature to the site, Eduardo comes in and sees him doing it, and Mark explains how critical the, quote, who's having sex piece is in a college social life. Mark says that the site is ready to go live and he's putting Eduardo's name on the masthead as co-founder and CFO, and Eduardo remarks about how much that will mean to his father. Mark says he will just need the emails Eduardo has from the Phoenix so that they can send the initial invites out to those people. Although Eduardo is reluctant to give out this information because obviously he's afraid of looking like he's spamming the members of the club, he finally caves and agrees to give them to Mark, and Mark makes fun of one of their emails but says that the site is now live and Eduardo offers to take them out to celebrate, but Mark is just staring at the computer and not responding. It cuts to the Winklevoss twins' friend Divya at some choir concert, and their girlfriends are on their laptops, and they say that they've been spammed the same link from like seven different people. And when Divya sees what the link is, he immediately gets up and walks out, and he realizes Mark has made his own separate website, and he makes quite a scene about it. Divya goes to tell the twins about it, and they immediately begin calling people as they check out the site, and they immediately notice that the site is booming and rapidly growing its user base, and that users are required to have a Harvard email in order to join. They are advised by their father and lawyer to put all of the story into an email and send it to them to determine what action, if any, can be taken. They intend to look over what they have and determine if it's necessary to send a cease and desist letter to Mark, but the twins ultimately don't really want to actually sue Mark for what he did because they think that as Harvard students, it's above them to do that, or at least initially they do feel that way. It cuts back to the deposition with the twins, and Mark and the lawyer asks Mark whether or not he knew that the Winklevoss father was wealthy and why he wouldn't just ask for money from them instead of Eduardo, especially considering they had already approached him. But Mark pointed out that he preferred the idea of being partners with Eduardo over them because he was actually friends with Eduardo. Then it cuts to the meeting with Eduardo, and they're explaining how quickly the website blew up for Mark and how everyone on campus was using it. It shows Mark and Eduardo in the audience at some kind of speaking event, and an attractive girl nearby named Christy tries to get Eduardo's attention. Christy is played by actress Brenda Song, who is a bit of an underrated hottie in my opinion. In real life, she's actually in a relationship with former child star Macaulay Culkin, and they have 2 kids together, but I don't think they're married. Christy asks Eduardo if that's really Mark Zuckerberg, and when Eduardo confirms that it is, he points out that the 2 of them started the Facebook website together, and she tells him to Facebook her later on, and maybe they can set up having a drink together. As they're leaving, Eduardo is remarking about how amazing of a development this is, and a couple of guys stop Mark and tell him what a great job he did on the Facebook. Then when they get back to the apartment, Eduardo suggests to Mark that they should look into monetizing the site, but Mark is not on board with that idea at all because even though they have a lot of users, he thinks that suddenly flooding everything with ads will be damaging to the appeal the site has for users, which I tend to agree with because I think if in the first few years that Facebook existed, that was kind of a cool thing about it that made it better was that it wasn't always flooded with ads. Eduardo notices the cease and desist letter from the Winklevoss twins and asks Mark about it. Mark says that he's had it for like 10 days and that he got it right after he launched the site. Mark said that because it was addressed to him, he didn't feel as though he needed to inform Eduardo about it, and Mark just completely downplays this whole situation. Then it cuts back to the deposition between Mark and the Winklevoss twins, and their lawyer further points out that he points out that it seems like Mark did not raise any concerns to the twins for over a month until he finally sent a message explaining his issues with their site and its limitations. Mark looks over and points out that it started raining midway through the lawyer talking, and the lawyer asks Mark if he has his undivided attention. Mark clarifies that he does not, and then he explains that the lawyer actually has the minimum amount of his attention. He makes a remarkable and seemingly arrogant declaration that if the twins want to sit on his shoulders and call themselves tall, they are free to do so, but that doesn't mean that they are. He explains that his attention is back at the office of Facebook, where he and his colleagues are accomplishing things that the twins never could have dreamed of doing or have ever been capable of doing. Then we return to the flashback of Mark and Eduardo, and Mark is asking for more information on the girls that Eduardo met while the speaker was presenting, and Eduardo says their names were Christy and Alice, and they want to have drinks that night. We get a smash cut to Eduardo Eduardo and Christy going into a bathroom stall together at a club where they're getting increasingly physical with each other. When Eduardo gets back and sits with Mark, Eduardo is seemingly over the fucking moon about the fact that they have essentially groupies. Mark looks over to a different table in the club and notices his ex Erica from the opening scene is sitting with some people, and he goes over to talk to her. She is understandably unexcited to see him, and he asks her if he could talk to her alone, and she just declines and says that she's fine right where she is. She makes it clear that she doesn't appreciate the fact that Mark compared her to a farm animal on his blog, and Mark is more busy trying to tell her about the site that he developed. She explains that he said all of the dick things that he did on his blog and published it for the world to see after she tried to be nice to him, and she tells him good luck with his video game or whatever it is he's making. Eduardo comes by and assumes that Mark was apologizing to Erica, even though he clearly wasn't, and Mark declares that they need to expand. Like, basically, it's just this triggers him into doing more, and it's pretty obvious that he wants to expand as a way to get back at Erica because she obviously pissed him off just now. Then back at the apartment, Mark is rolling out his ideas to Eduardo and company about expanding to Yale and Columbia. Christy and Alice are in the room with them, but Mark declines their help when they offer it, and Eduardo tacks on that they should include Stanford so that Palo Alto can get some exposure to the Facebook as well. Mark curiously mentions that he wants there to be a story in the BU newspaper, clearly hoping that it will make for a good chance for Erica to see it, I guess. It cuts back to the deposition, and Marilyn Delpy is trying to extend an olive branch to Mark at one point, even though she's actually on his own legal team, because obviously Mark is alienating pretty much everyone in the room, and she tells him that he must really hate the Winklevosses, but Mark says that he doesn't really hate anyone, and he just points out that they're mad at him because for once in their lives, something didn't go how it was supposed to for them. We see Divya arguing with one of the twins about how they should handle the situation, and they point out that every second Facebook is up and running, it's damaging to their Harvard Connection website that is already pretty hindered by the fact that it doesn't fucking exist yet. The twins say it will make them look bad to really go nuts pursuing action against Mark, but Divya points out that it's really more of a legal issue because in his mind, Mark did break the law by doing what he did. But one of the twins points out that they might have a better shot at proving he broke school laws at Harvard, and perhaps they could speak to Harvard officials about it. But what's so idiotic about this initially is that even if this were to work, wouldn't the best case scenario be that Mark might get expelled instead of actually having legal action held against him? Regardless, they decide they need to meet with Harvard's president about it, and the scene closes out with asking why Mark would have expanded the Facebook to Stanford, and Divya says that it's obvious why they would do that. It cuts to somewhere near Stanford University where a man named Sean Parker is in bed, and he's played by Justin Timberlake, who is seemingly just getting done banging it out with a girl named Amelia Ritter, who is played by Dakota Johnson. For those who don't know, Dakota Johnson is an actress who I also have noted here is hot, and she is the love child of Melanie Griffith and Don Johnson, who were married once in 1976 for less than a year and then remarried in 1989 and were divorced again in 1996. They had Dakota during that second stint of marriage. Melanie Griffith is best known by me as being in the movies Working Girl and Milk Money. She is the daughter of Tippi Hedren, who I know as the actress from Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, like that was her big movie. Don Johnson is best known for his leading role in the original Miami Vice TV show from the 80s, and also the Kevin Costner golf comedy Tin Cup. Fucking top tier cinema right there. Not even joking, I love that movie. Amelia gets up to get ready and tries to give him a hard time because she doesn't think he even knows her name, despite having just gone to the Bone Zone with her, and he jokingly guesses her name is Stanford. But just as she goes to chastise him for not knowing, he shocks her by remembering almost everything about her that she's told him, but it seems like she doesn't actually remember anything about him. He reveals that he doesn't attend college there, and he hasn't attended any kind of school for a long time, and she worries that he might be underage, despite JT being almost 30 at the time this movie was made. He says he's plenty old, and he's an entrepreneur, which she assumes is a douchey way of saying that he's unemployed, which is totally fair for her to assume that a little bit. But what's honestly worse than that is when people who fall for pyramid schemes put entrepreneur as their job on their profiles. Like, no, Andrea, you're not a businesswoman just because you're an Herbalife distributor. Moron is a more fitting word and has fewer syllables. He clarifies that he's not just some loser, but that he founded Napster, and then she gets confused and says that Sean Parker founded Napster, and he clarifies that he is in fact Sean Parker and points out that she didn't even know who he was. And I just love that it seems like to her it is completely inconsequential that she was so critical of him when she thought he didn't remember her name. And now that it's clear she didn't know anything about him, it's just no big deal. He explains that he's not rich because virtually every successful musician has sued him over Napster, and it has kind of left him broke. Then as she goes to jump in the shower, she asks if he can check it, or he asks if he can check his email on her computer, and he sees that she has a browser open to the Facebook. He asks her to come back from the shower, and she is slow about doing so, and he confusingly lies and tells her that there's a snake in her room, which inexplicably makes her rush out to see, even though I would have the exact opposite reaction because I don't have any love for a nope rope, and I don't know why it's suggesting that snakes scare her, but she eagerly rushes out to be closer to one and is annoyed when she finds out the truth. He asks her what the website is, and she explains that they got it there a couple of weeks before, and it's strangely addictive. Sean is clearly intrigued and decides that he wants to track down this Mark Zuckerberg guy. The twins have their meeting with Harvard president Larry Summers, who seems confused by what they want to do about their situation. They think that because of the fact that the student handbooks say Harvard students are required to be honest and not steal, that their issue that they're having with Mark is somehow the university's thing to deal with. Summers doesn't really see it that way, and he suggests that they move on to another venture because they're being a bit delusional about how valuable their idea was and that they should take it to court if they really want to do something. The twins frustratedly leave the meeting, and it cuts back to Eduardo's deposition where he talks about the time after he had invested his money and they were having meetings with people, and it flashes back and Mark is clearly not taking one of the meetings Eduardo set up seriously and keeps making clicking noises with his mouth for no reason. Then it jumps to another meeting that Mark was much more excited to attend, which was with Sean Parker. Eduardo's girlfriend Christy arranged the meeting, and Eduardo, and Mark eagerly await Sean's arrival because he's over 20 minutes late, which actually frustrates Eduardo and really sets the tone for his perception of Sean, because in addition to that, Eduardo said he asks around and thinks that Sean is too much of a wild card, and he doesn't think that they need him because of his reputation with famous failed companies and drugs. Sean finally arrives and orders for all of them, and he orders drinks and food for all of them. And Eduardo says that it was all Sean from there, and they talked about his history, especially with Napster. Eduardo explains that Sean seemed paranoid and delusional and believes people will find anything bad to say about you, whether it's true or not. Sean convinces Mark that he needs to move to California, and during their convo, they discuss their expansion strategy, and it's pretty clear that Sean and Eduardo are kind of butting heads a lot. Sean agrees with Mark's refusal to put ads on the site because the appeal of the site is that it's cool and ads would bring down its appeal. Then he also drops the idea about how $1 million shouldn't be their focus and how they have $1 billion idea if they execute it right. He uses the analogy that guys don't hang framed pictures of themselves with 14 different trout. They hang pictures of themselves with one huge fish. Sean modestly explains that he doesn't really have a dog in their fight, in theory, and then as he picks up the check and goes to leave, he drops his one last idea, and he tells them that they should drop the and just call it Facebook because it's cleaner. And Eduardo makes it clear that Sean basically had Mark eating out of his hand at that point. Eduardo is frustrated that Mark has bought into everything so much of what Sean said because Eduardo is their only source of funding, and he doesn't agree with most of Sean's ideas. They cut back to Eduardo's deposition where they discuss the original ownership percentages of the company, and Mark's lawyer, Sai, asks Eduardo if he's ever done anything that would make the company look bad. Despite his initial denial about it, it is revealed that he was accused of animal cruelty because as part of his initiation process into the Phoenix Club, he had had to care for a live chicken and have it with him at all times for 1 week. It keeps flashing back to Mark reading an article in the Harvard newspaper accusing him of animal cruelty. The gist of the accusation is that Eduardo absent-mindedly fed the animal cooked chicken once without thinking and had to settle it with animal rights groups who said it was forced cannibalism, and Eduardo assumes the story was planted by the Winklevosses. Through the story, Eduardo unintentionally reveals that Mark was using Facebook to cheat at one point on a class assignment, and he tries to backpedal by saying it was not his intention because friends don't do that to each other. But when they clarify that he already said it, Eduardo just callously says, "Oops." Then he calls Mark out for telling them about the chicken thing. But Sai explains that they found out about it on their own, and Mark even defended Eduardo when asked, and Mark just says, "Oops." In a continuation of the flashback, this is when Mark reveals he's moving to a house he found near Stanford campus in California, and Eduardo assumes this is the result of their meeting with Sean, and it's pretty clear they still disagree on Sean being a good person to take business cues from. It cuts to Eduardo finding Mark at a weird party where there are guys racing to hack into a website, and they're taking shots for a variety of reasons, like every 10 lines of code they have to write, they take a shot or whatever. It's revealed that the whole point of the competition is an initiation to win a job as a coder at Facebook. Eduardo reveals to Mark that he opened a separate account for the business and put 18 grand in it to be a team player, and he figured they were partners. He also says that he thought it would be enough to tide the company over for the summer, and he didn't figure that much could go wrong in the next 3 months, which prompts a cut to Mark partying at the new place in Cali, and Sean Parker happens to come to his door with his girlfriend who lives across the street. Sean is of course happy that Mark took his advice and thinks the house and the crew there are perfect, and Mark reveals that Eduardo took an internship in New York instead of coming to Cali with him, and Sean is judgy about the fact that he didn't come out there with him. They go to an LA nightclub, and Sean explains that he read Mark's blog and reveals to him by saying that he started Napster because the girl he loved in high school was with the captain of the lacrosse team, and he wanted to steal her away from the guy. He argues that he changed the music business forever, and what he did doesn't need to be seen as a failure, or at least he doesn't see it as a failure. He basically goes back to talking about how he wants Mark to take control as CEO and explains that he thinks Eduardo made a bad call by taking the internship and trying to kiss ass to find any success. Mark says that if Sean and his Victoria's Secret supermodel girlfriend have nowhere to stay, that they should come and stay with him. We see a lot of frustration getting to the twins as they lose a race and seemingly feel things falling apart, and they really feel the popularity of Facebook being more pronounced in conversations. They finally decide they actually need to sue Mark since nothing else has worked. It cuts to Mark's house where Sean is now living, and Eduardo shows up by way of a taxi after Mark forgot to pick him up from the airport. Eduardo asks Sean how old the girls are that are there, and basically just instigates more bad blood between them. Mark wakes up and sees Eduardo, but is not at all apologetic for completely forgetting to pick him up at the airport, and then it's revealed that Sean has been setting up meetings with investors in California. This, of course, angers Eduardo because he was supposed to be handling the business end of things, and it doesn't help that Sean also mocks his efforts to find investors. Like, basically, the people that he's getting meetings with or trying to get meetings with aren't as good as any of the people that Sean is able to acquire. Mark and Eduardo end up going into a room in private, and Mark asks how the internship is going, and Eduardo reminds him that he already told him he quit after 1 day. Eduardo also reveals that his relationship with Christy is causing frustration because she's insanely jealous. He explains to Mark that Sean is acting like he's part of the company, but Mark points out that at least Sean is having success in setting up these investor meetings, and Eduardo is not having much luck in New York with major investors at all. So in his anger and haste at his perceived bad treatment, Eduardo goes to the bank right away and fucking freezes the company bank account and stops payment on all transactions. It cuts to Sean and Mark meeting with an investor named Peter Thiel, who agrees to invest $500,000 $500,000 and explains that they'll begin discussing their company's restructuring to incorporate Facebook into the Facebook into them. Or no, wait, no, it is Facebook now. Okay, I'm sorry. But he ends the scene by asking who the hell this Eduardo Saverin is, and it cuts to Eduardo laying in bed back in New York, presumably, and Christie lets herself into his apartment and is angry about him not letting her know that he got back that afternoon. She explains that she sent 47 text messages, and I gotta say, I love me a dedicated queen who is pro-communication. She's also angry that his relationship status on his Facebook profile is set to single, and he explains that he was single when he set it up and he doesn't really know how to change it, which she doesn't really believe because he's the CFO of Facebook. But he gives her a silk scarf as a present, and she says she never wears scarves and accuses him of leaving his status as single so that he could fuck Silicon Valley sluts. He gets a call from Mark, who found out about him freezing the account, and he explains that Eduardo could have legitimately fucked everything up that they've built by doing that. He says that Facebook cannot operate without money, and that it's very important that their servers never go down because it could destroy their reputation as being so reliable. In the background, London lights the scarf on fire and drops it in a trash can on Eduardo's head. I mean Christie, of course. The strange thing is that I've never actually seen a single episode of any Sweet Life show, but I YouTubed the scene where Brenda Song's character, London Tipton, is learning to drive, and she refers to the shifter as a Prindle, as a phonetic pronunciation of the automatic gears listed beside the shifter. And although it was amusing, I opted not to watch the entire series because it came out after I would have been in its target age demographic. Eduardo finally notices that Christie started the fire, and Mark keeps yelling at him, and Mark is furious because he could have jeopardized everything. But Mark also has good news. He tells him that Peter Thiel's $500,000 deal happened and that they're setting up offices for them at their company, and he needs Eduardo to come back to Cali to meet Peter and to sign some documents. Eduardo breaks up with Christie, and when she finds out, basically, he breaks up with Christie when she finds out that he's going back to Cali. But honestly, that's just a bad call to me because I think she has great enthusiastic energy and she only needs a couple of tweaks, guys. We can fix her, all right? It cuts to Eduardo meeting with Peter Thiel's people to finalize the restructuring to incorporate them into Facebook and assign new shares. They explain to Eduardo that he has to sign the documents and that they're giving him a bigger ownership percentage because they may have to dilute his shares later for new investors. And he also kind of just accepts this because he's an economics major and he does know about business and he understands principles. They also tell him that he will have over 1 million in shares as a result of this deal. And I'm going to semi-spoil something by pointing out that Eduardo is doing this whole meeting without his own lawyer, which is never a good idea for a big business deal like this. They explain that Mark already cut his share from 60 to 51%, and Eduardo explains that Mark doesn't care about making money and he needs to be protected. It's then revealed that in addition to the 3 original owners, Sean Parker and Peter Thiel now own about 7% each, which Eduardo kind of seems okay with. It cuts back to Eduardo's deposition and he answers a question revealing that he had no idea at that time that he was essentially signing his own death certificate by agreeing to all of this. He explains that he knows it was idiotic to not have his own lawyers look over the documents first, but he explains that he was Mark's only friend and he didn't expect to be hoodwinked and bamboozled like this. At that time, Mark told Eduardo he wasn't going back to school for at least a year and that Eduardo should come back later that year to see how far they've come as they expect to hit 1 million members by then. Sean takes Mark to a meeting with some other investors who he anticipates will beg him to take their money, but he reveals it's more of a revenge mission to tell some old enemies to fuck off, basically. After that, Eduardo gets an email requesting him to come back for a meeting because Sean's revenge stunt caused the investor he was getting back at to offer some huge sum to invest. I don't know if I misunderstood that or what, but it was like, it didn't make sense in the moment because it's like, why if you were telling somebody to fuck off, were they like, oh yes, I want to be a part of your company? You know, like, I don't know if they just really pitched it to him well first or what. When Eduardo gets back to Facebook headquarters, he realizes that he was being ambushed and was asked to sign more documents. And it turns out that the documents that he signed originally allowed them to dilute his shares down to pretty much nothing so that they could offer the shares to new investors. Eduardo charges out of the one-on-one meeting with the lawyer after realizing what happened, and he yells across the office at Mark, but Sean tells him that he's wired in and coding. In the most intense scene of this movie, Eduardo ignores Sean's request not to bother Mark, and he grabs Mark's laptop and smashes it hard on the ground, and Mark's headphones fall off. Sean has someone call security, and Mark tries to explain that Eduardo knew his shares would be diluted down, but Eduardo quickly asks and finds out that his were the only ones that actually had that happen at all. Eduardo tensely explains this at the deposition and angrily looks at Mark as he explains that his ownership shares were diluted down to 0.03% from 34%. It cuts back to their confrontation, and Eduardo says that with this turn of events, it will be like he's not even a part of Facebook, and Sean clarifies that it won't be like that and that he's actually not going to be a part of Facebook. But when Eduardo fires back that his name is on the masthead, Sean tells him to look again, implying that it was removed. Mark says that he doesn't feel bad that the supposed business head of their company made a bad business deal. Eduardo asks him if it was because of freezing the account or if it was because he got into the Phoenix Club, and Mark he just kind of shakes his head, and Eduardo assumes that it was also Mark who planted the chicken story in the newspaper as revenge, but Mark says that he also didn't do that. He thinks that Mark was mad at that the article called Eduardo a co-founder of Facebook, and Eduardo explains that he should lawyer up because he's not coming back for just 30%. This time he's coming back for all of it. He goes to storm off, but Sean stops him to give him back a check for his original $19,000 investment, but says to be careful cashing it because he wrote it on the account that Eduardo froze. Eduardo rears back and fakes like he's going to punch Sean, and Sean flinches and recoils nervously. And then Eduardo explains that he likes being around Sean because it makes him feel so tough, and he walks out with security escorting him. Sean turns back around and tells everyone the show's over and to gear up for hitting 1 million users, and he asks Mark if he's okay, and Mark tells Sean that he didn't have to be so hard on Eduardo and doubles down on that thought when Sean tries to say it's just part of doing business, even though Mark clearly knew what was going on with Eduardo's ownership shares. So clearly he didn't feel that bad for him, but I'm gathering he didn't know Sean was making such a production out of inviting Eduardo out to show him how much he got fucked over. Sean explains that Eduardo almost killed everything they were doing, and Sean casually mentions he's gotten involved with one of their interns named Ashley, and Mark is just irritated because that's obviously not a great idea, and they finally hit 1 million users and cheer, but Mark clearly feels bittersweet about it. They have this after party, and there's no Mark there to be seen, and Sean is sharing a bunch of visions for what is next for Facebook, and suddenly the music cuts out downstairs, and one of the girls with Sean asks why it stopped and says that he should investigate. It turns out that the police are busting the party, and of course Sean has underage drinking going on, and it's alluded to that he has drugs too, but he says that they were planted there, and to be fair, if they had been, he didn't seem particularly bothered when he discovered them, right? I mean, it wasn't like he was just like, oh no, I can't have drugs around here. He calls Mark to tell him what happened, and Mark is irritated because he was already concerned about Sean's antics and behavior from his reputation and from some of the stuff he had seen already happening. Mark knows this will make the news. Basically, this whole story will be on the news, and Sean asks if he thinks maybe Eduardo set up this bust, but Mark says no, and Sean guesses maybe the guy that they had their revenge stunt with did it. But regardless, it's like, bro, you had this coming in so many ways that it's kind of crazy that he's acting like evil things are happening to him and like the world's just out to get him. It cuts back to the deposition, and Marilyn tells a zoned out Mark that they're done for the day, and he tries to ask her if she wants to go get dinner with him, but she turns him down. He explains that he's not a bad guy, and she says that she knows, and she realizes that most of what was said in the proceedings was either exaggerated or basically just over the top, and the rest was probably made up. He asks her what's next, and she says that their team will draft up a settlement agreement, or a bunch of settlement agreements rather, and this frustrates Mark because he proclaims he did invent Facebook. She clarifies that she realizes that, but that doesn't mean that it will hold up in court because she's basically trying to tell him that Mark doesn't seem likable enough to believe he was in the right with how he did things necessarily. She also says that even with her limited experience, she knows how, in addition to that, it would be easy to manipulate a jury to believe anything they wanted if they were on the other side of the case. She explains that he'll have to pay them a little bit more to include NDAs in the settlement and basically make the plaintiffs not talk about anything. She advises that Mark just pay them and put it behind him as best he can. She gives him a final thought by saying, "You're not an asshole, Mark. You're just trying so hard to be." It shows Mark logging onto Facebook and looking at his ex, Erica Albright's profile on there and sending her a request as the song "Baby You're a Rich Man" by the Beatles starts playing. It does those little blurbs about what happened to everyone that they do at the end of the movies sometimes. And the Winklevosses got a $65 million settlement and signed the NDA. It also mentions that they rode for the US Olympic team in Beijing and placed 6th. Mark is still sitting at the computer watching the screen intently as he repeatedly hits the F5 key to refresh Erica's page to see if she's accepted his request. It explains that Eduardo Saverin received an unknown settlement and had his name restored to the masthead as a co-founder of Facebook. Then it points out that at the time this movie was made, Facebook had over 500 million users worldwide, and the site was valued at over 25 billion, and Mark Zuckerberg was the youngest billionaire alive. And then we roll credits. Okay, so as I often do with these kinds of movies that are supposedly based on a true story, I want to have just a moment to cover some notes about the historical accuracy or lack thereof in this movie. So Mark Zuckerberg has stated that the film is largely fictional, especially in regards to the assertion that he started Facebook to get girls or that there was so much partying going on. He claims that he started the site because he likes to build things. And I don't know. I mean, I probably believe that a little bit at least because they definitely really beefed that up, and I don't know that I buy it. Co-founder Dustin Moskovitz has stated that he finds it interesting how the film left out many important things while emphasizing things that were largely irrelevant. For instance, he mentions that he has never even met the Winklevoss twins, nor were they ever involved in anything in the first 6 years of the site's development. But that confuses me because I do feel as though they did a pretty good job explaining that the Winklevoss twins didn't actually have a lot of involvement in the development of the site, and this is all really about them saying that they had the initial idea. Eduardo Saverin agrees that the film is largely made for entertainment and is mostly fiction and certainly is not meant to be viewed as some kind of documentary. Sean Parker has stated that his depiction in this film as being a morally reprehensible human being is complete fiction and that he and Eduardo Saverin remained friends after this all happened. Writer Aaron Sorkin acknowledges the inaccuracies of the film and has stated that sometimes a story must sacrifice the truth to be good and entertaining, which is also true. Okay, so trivia for this movie. During one of the depositions, it is mentioned that the invention of Facebook made Mark Zuckerberg the biggest thing on campus that included 19 Nobel laureates, 15 Pulitzer Prize winners, 2 future Olympians, and a movie star. And one of the lawyers then asks, who was the movie star? And the response is, does it matter? The movie star was, in fact, Natalie Portman, who was enrolled at Harvard as a junior and senior when Mark Zuckerberg was a freshman. She invited Aaron Sorkin to a dinner party with her Harvard friends to provide him insider information on the school's social life at the time Facebook was created. Jesse Eisenberg, who was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, said in an interview that one of the hardest things about this role was having to deliberately speak and behave in a manner that he had struggled against in his own personality his entire life. Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield became good friends during filming. According to Eisenberg, the dramatic rivalry between their characters was hard for the two because it affected them emotionally. Andrew Garfield came into rehearsal with a copy of Economics for Dummies. Inspired by that move, Jesse Eisenberg bought C++ for Dummies, which is a programming language. According to Eisenberg, both he and Garfield read the introductions of their books and then put them down. Mark Zuckerberg originally planned to never see the movie, and he ended up taking several of his employees to see it. He later remarked that despite some of the film's inaccuracies, they got his clothing right. As a part of his research, Jesse Eisenberg read a copy of Mark Zuckerberg's college application. Zuckerberg's essay focused on his love of fencing, so Eisenberg took a couple of lessons, and he quickly realized it affected his posture and the way he moved, and applied that knowledge to his portrayal of the character. Most outfits that Mark wears in the film are things that the real Mark Zuckerberg has been seen wearing in pictures, with at least one exception, a t-shirt from a theater company that Jesse Eisenberg had belonged to. Writer Aaron Sorkin directed the last shot of the film's shoot. David Fincher announced he was leaving. Sorkin thought it was a joke until the production crew came up to him asking how to film it. It only amounted to a second's worth of footage anyway, but Sorkin got to announce the final wrap at the end. During the nightclub scene, the extras are miming their dancing, and the music was added in post-production. Jesse Eisenberg and Justin Timberlake had to shout their lines as though they were talking over music. Eisenberg said it was a challenge to not lose their voices. For IMDb nuggets, Joseph Mazzello's first film of the 2010s, Mazzello plays Dustin Moskovich, who is just like the tiniest character in this movie. Like, shut the fuck up. You don't need to submit anything to IMDb trivia if you don't have anything. All right, on to info and ratings. Opening weekend, 22.4 million. Worldwide gross, 225 million. IMDb rating, 7.8. Letterboxd rating, 3.9. Rotten Tomato critic score, 96%. Rotten Tomato audience score, 87%. Personal rating, 5 out of 5 stars. Praise for this movie. Despite all of its obvious inaccuracies historically, I do find this movie remarkably watchable and entertaining. I think that the performances are spectacular and they feel very human, despite many claims that Mark Zuckerberg is in fact a lizard person in real life. Criticism, obviously, if you can't get past the fact that a lot of what happens in this movie is heavily exaggerated or even made up, it may be tough for you to watch, even though it is sort of built as a true story. Like, that's just kind of how they make it seem. All right, everyone. Thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.
I'm here to welcome you to